The internet says 2 Caterpillar D9 bulldozers were lost when the Teton Dam broke in 1976. It is in the video titles and the comment sections. We looked into it. The 2 D9s did not go down with the dam. Their operators reversed them off the crest and got clear. What was lost that morning was a Caterpillar D8 and an International Harvester TD15 on the downstream face, an hour before the collapse. The man who ran the excavation crew told the story himself in an interview recorded a year after the flood. His name was Jay Calderwood. Jay Calderwood was the general excavation foreman for Morrison Knudsen, the company building the dam, and he had spent 4 years on the job. On the morning of June 5th, he drove 40 minutes across the Teton Range because a dam does not usually need its foreman on a Saturday, and this one did. By the time he climbed onto one of the 2 D9 crawler tractors, the dam was already dying. He and a second operator, Owen Daly, ran the D9s along the upstream face, pushing rock into a whirlpool that had opened in the reservoir. When the crest began to settle under them, the site superintendent waved them back. They reversed. 30 feet behind them, the dam stopped existing. That is the correction most people come here for. It is also the least of what went wrong. Before any machine went into that reservoir, before the first load of fill was placed, the men building this dam were told in writing that it would fail, and told how. The warning has a date on it. It has a name on it. It sat in a government file while 10 million cubic yards of the wrong material went into a canyon, the record already described as full of caves. We went back through that record. This is what it says, from the ground up. The Teton Dam stood in eastern Idaho, on the Teton River, about 15 miles northeast of the town of Rexburg. The Bureau of Reclamation finished it in November of 1975 and began filling the reservoir that same month. It was an earth-fill dam, a wall of compacted soil more than 300 feet high above the streambed, with a core of fine silt meant to hold the water back. By early June of 1976, the reservoir was nearly full for the first time. The water behind the dam stood at more than 5,300 feet of elevation and was still rising about 3 feet a day, faster than the original plan had allowed. On a Saturday morning, on its first fill, the dam came apart from the inside. 11 people died, and the water reached nearly 100,000 people downstream. The Bureau built the dam out of what the ground nearby offered, and what it offered was low S, a fine wind-blown silt that covers much of that part of Idaho. Low S packs down well and holds a shape. It also washes away the moment moving water finds it. Operators who have dug in it describe the same thing, hard as rock until you disturb it, and then, mixed with a little water and air, closer to a liquid. The core of the dam, the part meant to be watertight, was built of this. About 10 million cubic yards of it, placed in thin layers and rolled flat by the same crawler tractors that would later be remembered for backing off the crest. The design carried no tow drains and no filters, the features other engineers used to catch seepage before it could carry material. Under the fill was the other half of the problem. The canyon was cut into rhyolite, a volcanic rock that cracks as it cools, and the rock on both sides was full of open joints. The standard fix is a grout curtain, a line of drilled holes pumped full of cement until the cracks below are sealed. The Bureau estimated the job would take about 260,000 cubic feet of grout. It took more than double that. Some of the holes would not stop taking grout at all, and in places the work was halted while the rock was still drinking, to hold down the cost. By the end, crews had pumped close to 500,000 cubic feet of cement, along with sand and bentonite and calcium chloride, into more than 100,000 feet of drilled holes. In 1973, digging the key trench near the right side of the canyon, they found out where all that grout had been going. The largest fissures in the rock were not cracks. They were caves. One of them measured about 11 feet wide and 100 feet long. Another was 9 feet wide in places and ran 190 feet. A Bureau employee walked into one for about 100 feet and found stalactites and stalagmites on the walls, which only form where water has been moving through a space for a very long time. These caves lay beyond the line of the grout curtain, so they were never sealed. The crews compacted 10 million cubic yards of erodible silt onto a foundation they had documented as hollow in places and kept building. None of this was hidden. The grout overrun was in the records. The caves were in the excavation reports. Morris and Knudson's crews were doing exactly what the design told them to do. On ground, the design had described and then chosen to trust. The dam topped out in November of 1975, and the Bureau began filling the reservoir faster than the original plan allowed. Through the spring of 1976, the water rose against the silt core, looking for the cracks in the rock the grout had missed. On the morning of June 5th, it found them. The first sign had come 2 days earlier, and it looked like nothing. On June 3rd, 2 small springs appeared in the ground 600 to 900 feet below the dam, running clear at 40 and 60 gallons a minute. The next day, another one appeared closer to the base. Clear water from the ground near a new dam is not, by itself, a warning. Engineers expect some seepage. What matters is whether it stays clear. Early on Saturday, June 5th, a worker found water coming out of the rock on the right side of the canyon, about 15 feet above the streambed, and this water was not clear. It was muddy, and it was moving at 20 to 30 cubic feet per second. Muddy water means the seepage has stopped simply passing through and started carrying the dam with it. Somewhere inside, the reservoir had found a path and was widening it, washing the fill out from within, while the surface still looked solid. By 9 in the morning, the flow had grown to 40 and 50 cubic feet per second. A wet spot opened on the downstream face, 15 or 20 feet from the abutment, and began to run. Crews brought in bulldozers to push fill into the growing hole, and this is where the machines were lost. As the operators worked the face, the ground under their tracks gave way, and a Caterpillar D8 and an International Harvester TD15 slid into the opening. Both operators were pulled clear with ropes. The machines were not. They went into the dam and stayed there. By then, the outcome was no longer in doubt. Word reached the county sheriffs before 11, and over the next half hour, the order went down the valley to get everyone out. Above them, on the reservoir side, a whirlpool had opened where the water was draining into the dam. This is when Calderwood and Daly took the 2 D9s onto the upstream face and began pushing riprap into the funnel, trying to close it from above. It did not hold. The erosion inside had already gone further than anything a bulldozer could carry. A little before 11:30, the superintendent, John Belagante, felt the crest drop about 5 feet under the machines. He could not be heard over the engines, so he waved his arm, and the 2 D9s reversed in first gear with 30 feet of grade between them and the edge. At about 11:55, the crest of the Teton Dam collapsed into the reservoir. What had been the top of the dam simply stopped existing, and the gap widened to 100 feet across, while Calderwood watched from 30 feet away. 2 minutes later, the reservoir broke fully through. Around 4 million cubic yards of the embankment washed downstream and buried the concrete powerhouse at the foot of the canyon. By evening, the reservoir was empty. 80 billion gallons of water had gone down the Teton River Valley in a matter of hours. The way the Teton Dam failed was a known failure mode. Water piping through the contact between the earthfill and the fractured rock had nearly taken one of the Bureau's own dams 11 years earlier. In September of 1965, Fontanelle Dam, on the Green River in Wyoming, about 160 miles from the Teton site, began to come apart during its first high water. Seepage eroded a cavity in the downstream face, about 80 feet wide, 50 feet deep, and 170 feet long. Crews drew the reservoir down as fast as the outlet works would allow, with the town below evacuated, and after about 10 days of round-the-clock work, the dam held. Barely. The cavity that had opened in its face held roughly 10,500 cubic yards of washed-out material, with 300,000 acre-feet of water standing behind a dam that was coming apart as they worked. The mechanism at Fontenelle, piping through the abutment, was the mechanism coming for Teton. 2 months after Fontenelle nearly failed, an engineer named George Lane wrote a memo to the Bureau's chief engineer describing what had happened and why. He put it plainly, piping through the earth embankment at its contact with the rock abutment, a description that reads today like it was written about Teton. The memo was dated November 29, 1965. It went to the chief engineer, Barney Belport, the same office that would sign off on the design decisions at Teton. Belport, in a later account of Fontenelle, framed the trouble as a problem with the abutment, which had the effect of leaving the embankment design where it was. What the Lane memo said was not carried into how the Bureau built the dams that came after it. There was a more direct warning, closer to home. While the Teton Dam was under construction, a United States Geological Survey geologist named David Schleicher put his concern about the site in writing. "A failure here," he wrote, "would make an earlier local flood look like small potatoes." Then he added a line that reads differently now than it must have then. "Since such a flood could be anticipated," he wrote, "they might consider placing a series of motion picture cameras to document the process." The geology, he was told in effect, was not his call. The panel that investigated the failure traced it to exactly this. Water moved out of the silt core into the open joints in the rock and eroded a channel backward toward the reservoir until the dam was emptying itself through its own foundation. After the dam failed, the government's own auditor, the General Accounting Office, looked back at all of it. Its finding on the Bureau was blunt. It had taken unnecessary risks and leaned too heavily on design, while the Corps of Engineers, building similar dams, had used several layers of defense against this exact kind of seepage and brought in outside reviewers far more often. The Bureau had been told, more than once, in more than one file. It filled the reservoir anyway. The numbers that come out of that morning are worth getting exactly right, because the internet rounds them and a few sources get them wrong. 11 people died in the Teton Dam flood. That is the official figure from the federal group that investigated the failure. It is worth saying plainly, because the number drifts. There is a peer-reviewed engineering case study presented at a forensics congress in 2003 and cited ever since, that opens by stating the failure killed 14. The record says 11. 6 of them drowned, 2 more died of heart attacks during the evacuation, and the oldest was 94. Nearly 100,000 people lived downstream of that dam, and the reason the number is 11 and not far higher is that the warning had gone out while the dam was still standing, and the valley had the time to move. People carried their neighbors to high ground before the water reached them. Downstream farms lost an estimated 16,000 head of livestock, but the people, for the most part, got out. The damage is usually given as a range, $400 million to $2 billion, depending on who is counting and what they count. There is a more exact number under the range. When the federal claims program closed in January of 1987, the government had paid 7,563 claims, for a total of $322,034,250.44. The program tracked it to the cent. At its peak, before the disputes were worked through, people had filed nearly 8,000 claims worth more than $500 million. What the government finally paid was less than that, and the difference took years to settle. The two machines that went into the downstream face, the D8 and the TD15, were never recovered. When the reservoir drained, the water carried them somewhere down the valley, and the Bureau noted that whatever they might have shown about the failure went with them. They are still out there, under 50 years of Idaho silt and farmland. Nobody has gone to bring them back. Downstream, in Idaho Falls, the Snake River crested the next day, and water began running over the Broadway Bridge, one of the main crossings in the city. To save it, residents cut a 40-foot channel through Broadway on the west side of the bridge to take the pressure off, filling sandbags and hauling them in their own pickups and dump trucks. A city councilman at the time, Mel Erickson, put it simply: everybody pitched in. The Teton Dam was never rebuilt. The Bureau paid the claims and did not put the dam back. Today, about 2/3 of the original embankment still stands in the canyon, untouched for 50 years, with the Teton River running through the gap where the rest of it used to be. It is a local landmark now, two broken shoulders of earth on either side of the river, where the dam once closed the gap. The failure changed the agency that built it. Teton was the first dam the Bureau of Reclamation had ever lost, after about 75 years of building them across the West. In 1978, Congress passed a law directing the Bureau to go back through its existing dams and check them for the exact weakness that failed here. The work of the agency shifted, from building new dams to holding up the ones already standing. 50 years on, there is a push in Idaho to build it again. In 2025, the state legislature passed a resolution, led by a state senator from Idaho Falls named Kevin Cook, urging the federal government to study rebuilding the Teton Dam, along with enlarging several others, to add water storage for the region. Cook has said he has spoken with engineers who tell him it can be built safely this time, with a different design, and that the state needs the study to find out. In November of 2025, a group of nearly 20 people from eastern Idaho traveled to Washington to make the case to the state's congressional delegation in person, carrying a petition several thousand residents had signed. Part of that study already exists. In 2015, a basin study for the region priced a rebuilt Teton at about $490 million, without fish passage or power. It scored well on how much water the dam could store, and low on nearly everything else that mattered, from cost to public acceptance. The two federal panels that investigated the original failure both concluded that a safe dam could have been built at the site, using the defensive design the Bureau chose not to use. Whether that ground can be made to hold, on a canyon of fractured rock over caves, is the question the state is asking again. There is one more machine in this story. The two D9s that reversed off the crest survived the day, and according to the man who has kept the account, one of them survived the 50 years since. It sits on a farm near the small community of Wilford, not far from where the dam stood. And in 2026, Jay Calderwood, the foreman who drove it off the dam, is said to have climbed back into the seat one more time. We could not confirm that it is the same machine, beyond the word of the people who tell the story. But somewhere near that canyon, the dam is gone, the reservoir is gone, and by that account, the bulldozer that backed away from both is still running. There are more of these buried in the record, and we go looking for them every week. We will see you in the next one.